The engine is already screaming, not from power, but from strain. At 9,000 feet above the Pacific, the air trembles with heat and fear. Smoke trails claw across the sky. Anti-aircraft fire bursts like black flowers below. And inside the cockpit, hands steady, breath controlled, a young pilot tightens his grip, target in sight. The radio cracks, then dies. He doesn't pull up. He doesn't turn back. Because this is not a mission. It's a one-way flight. The aircraft shudders as wind resistance climbs. The ocean rushes closer. Every second stretches, longer than it should, like time itself refusing to move forward. He's done this before. Once, twice, 7 times. 7 times he flew toward death and survived. 7 times something went wrong. Engine failure, missed impact, last-second orders. 7 times fate said no. But today there will be no mistakes. No second chances. Below him, an enemy fleet cuts through the waves. Guns already tracking. Pilots already watching. And this time, he knows, they won't let him escape. This is the story of the man who survived 7 kamikaze missions, only to be sent back into the sky. To die again, the altimeter needle trembles. 8,500 feet dropping. The cockpit vibrates as the engine pushes beyond its limit, a metallic scream cutting through the rushing wind. Oil streaks across the glass. The smell of fuel is thick now, sharp, suffocating. Below, the ocean is no longer distant. It's rising, fast. His fingers tighten around the control stick. Sweat slips down his jaw, unnoticed. Every instinct, every hour of training, demands the same thing. Pull up, evade, survive. But that instinct has been trained out of him, replaced with something colder, something final. A single directive burned into his mind. Do not return. The formation behind him breaks apart. One aircraft dips too early. Gunfire tears it apart midair. Another vanishes into smoke before reaching its target. The sky is chaos now. Tracers slicing upward. Explosions blooming closer with every second. And still, he holds his line. Dead ahead, a warship. Massive. Armed. Waiting. Its guns rotate, tracking him with terrifying precision. He can almost feel the eyes watching from below. Sailors bracing. Gunners locking in. Men preparing for impact. He's seconds away now. Seconds from becoming a weapon. Seconds from disappearing. But then, a sudden jolt. The engine coughs. Power drops. Just for a moment. Just enough. The aircraft dips off angle. Not much. Just a few degrees. But in a dive like this, that's everything. The ship slips from his centerline. The moment breaks. And suddenly, he's flying past it. Alive. Again. The ocean flashes beneath him. The ship fades behind. The sky opens up where death was supposed to be. Silence. No explosion. No fire. Just the sound of an engine that refuses to die. And a pilot who wasn't supposed to live. This wasn't courage. This wasn't strategy. This was something else. Something he couldn't control. Something that had now happened. 7 times. And as he turns the aircraft back toward base, one truth settles in deeper than fear. Next time, they won't let him come back. By 1944, the war in the Pacific had turned brutal beyond recognition. Japan was losing. Fast. Its navy shattered. Its air power drained. Its industrial base collapsing under relentless bombing. The balance of power had shifted, and everyone knew it. So Japan made a decision, not one of strategy, but of desperation. They called it TACO, special attack. The world would come to know it by another name. Kamikaze. Pilots were no longer just soldiers. They were weapons. Guided missiles made of flesh, fuel, and resolve. The aircraft they flew weren't always specialized. Many were standard fighters, fast, agile, deadly in the right hands. Planes like the Mitsubishi Zero, once feared across the Pacific for its speed and maneuverability. But now, speed wasn't for dogfighting. It was for impact. Explosives were strapped beneath fuselages. Fuel tanks overfilled. Landing gear often removed to reduce drag. These aircraft were optimized for one thing, a direct hit. At low altitude, radar detection was minimal. At high speed, interception became difficult. a diving aircraft to reach devastating kinetic force, enough to cripple even heavily armored ships. And that's what made them terrifying. Not their technology, but their certainty. There was no retreat, no evasive maneuver, no survival instinct left to interfere with the mission. And that changed everything. American pilots quickly learned this wasn't a normal enemy. You couldn't outmaneuver a pilot who didn't care about living. You couldn't intimidate someone who had already accepted death. And worst of all, you couldn't predict them. Some came in low, skimming waves. Others dropped from the sun, invisible until the final seconds. Radar operators reported blips that vanished, then reappeared already diving. Gunners described the same moment again and again. A plane flying straight at them. No deviation, no fear, just impact. Ships burned, decks exploded, steel twisted under sudden force. Even near misses caused chaos. Fuel fires, structural damage, panic. The psychological effect was as powerful as the physical damage, because this wasn't war as they knew it. This was something else, something final. But inside Japan, not every pilot was eager. Many were young, barely trained, given a few hours of flight instruction, a ceremonial drink, and a headband, told they were heroes, told their sacrifice would save the nation. Some believed it, some didn't. And then there were those like him, a pilot who had already faced death 7 times. His missions didn't fail because of fear. They failed because of fate. Engines malfunctioned, weather shifted, orders changed at the last moment. Once, his release mechanism jammed. Another time, visibility dropped to near zero. Each time he returned, alive. Each time he was sent back, again and again, until survival itself became suspicious. Others whispered, unlucky, cursed, or worse, coward. But they didn't see what he saw. The final seconds of a kamikaze run weren't glorious. They were violent, chaotic, overwhelming. The aircraft would begin to shake as speed increased. Control surfaces stiffened. The horizon disappeared. Then came the flak. Explosions bursting all around. Shrapnel tearing through wings. Engines sputtering under stress. And through it all, you had to keep the nose steady. Directly at the target. No flinch. No correction. Because even a slight deviation meant failure. And failure meant coming back. To try again. By his 7th mission, he knew the pattern, he knew the fear, and he knew something else. He didn't want to die. Not like this. Not in a controlled fall towards steel and fire. But war doesn't ask what you want. It tells you what you are. And to them, he was already dead by the final year of the war. Kamikaze tactics had evolved into something disturbingly efficient. It wasn't just desperation anymore. It was systemized. Pilots were organized into waves, some as decoys, others as strike units. High-altitude aircraft drew attention, while low-level attackers slipped beneath radar coverage. Coordination improved, timing sharpened, and the results showed. Allied ships began reinforcing decks, adjusting formations, increasing combat air patrols. Radar picket ships were stationed farther out, early warning systems designed specifically to detect incoming suicide aircraft, because by now everyone understood one plane could change everything. Even a near miss could cripple a vessel, and a direct hit was catastrophic. Yet for every successful strike, there were many like his: failed runs, mechanical faults, disorientation, heavy defensive fire forcing last-second deviations. Kamikaze missions demanded perfection in conditions that rarely allowed it, and that's where reality clashed with ideology. Command expected unwavering success, but war delivered chaos. For him, each return wasn't relief. It was pressure. Each landing meant questions. Each failure meant another mission, another expectation to prove himself. By the 7th time, he wasn't just flying against the enemy. He was flying against doubt, against suspicion, against the growing belief that survival itself was a form of disobedience. And in a system built on sacrifice, living too long could become dangerous. When the war finally ended in 1945, thousands of lives had already been consumed by the kamikaze campaign. Planes destroyed, ships sunk, Young pilots erased from history the moment they hit their targets. But not him. He survived, not because he was spared, but because something, again and again, refused to let him die that way. History would later remember the kamikaze as a symbol of desperation, of loyalty, of the terrifying extremes a nation can reach when pushed to the edge. Militarily, the tactic caused real damage. Dozens of ships lost, hundreds damaged, thousands of sailors killed. But strategically, it couldn't stop the inevitable. It couldn't turn the tide. Because no matter how powerful the sacrifice, war is not won by dying. It's won by enduring. And that's what makes his story different. He wasn't remembered for the mission he completed, but for the ones he didn't. For the moments where death came close and passed him by. 7 times. In a war defined by endings, he became an exception, a man who stood at the edge of finality and stepped back, not by choice, but by chance. And maybe that's the most haunting part of all, because in a sky filled with men sent to die, he was the one forced to live. And long after the engines fell silent, after the oceans calmed, after the war finally ended, he carried something heavier than any bomb, the memory of 7 flights into death that never reached the ground. After the surrender, the skies grew quiet. No more formations, no more desperate dives, no more engines pushed to the edge of destruction. Airfields that once launched final missions now sat still, runways empty, hangars silent. The war's urgency replaced by an eerie calm. For many, it was the end. For him, it was something more complicated. Survival sounds like victory, but not all survival feels like it. He walked away from a war that had taken thousands just like him. Pilots who never returned, whose names were recorded, honored, and then slowly absorbed into history. They had completed their mission. He hadn't, and that difference mattered, because in the world he came from, purpose had been defined for him. Clear, absolute, final, to give everything, to not come back. But he did come back, again and again, not by refusal, not by rebellion, but by interruption, by malfunction, by chance. And when the war ended, there was no ceremony for that, no recognition for the missions that didn't end in impact, no place for the story of someone who was meant to die, but didn't. So what remained? Memory. Fragments of sky filled with fire, the sound of engines screaming toward oblivion, the sight of ships growing larger in the crosshairs, and the moments, those final seconds, when everything narrowed down to a single point and then slipped away. 7 times he faced that moment. 7 times he crossed into the space where life should have ended. And 7 times he was pulled back. Not everyone gets that. Not in war. Not in history. Because war remembers outcomes, victories, losses, sacrifices that fit into clean narratives. But his story doesn't fit. It lingers, unresolved, haunting in a different way. Because while others became symbols of sacrifice, he became a witness to it. A man who saw the end, over and over, and lived beyond it. And maybe that's the part that stays with us. Not the explosions, not the impact, but the silence after. The space where something was supposed to end, but didn't. Because sometimes the most powerful stories in war aren't about how people die. They're about how they survive when they were never meant to.